Chapter 3. Choosing is not creating from nothing. There's a quiet idea that accompanies almost every conversation about free will, the idea that when we choose, we are creating something new out of nothing. As if, faced with alternatives, there were inside us a neutral, sovereign, independent point capable of deciding without being conditioned by anything prior. That image is comforting, but it does not withstand an honest observation of everyday experience. When we look closely at our real choices, we realize they never arise from a void. Before any conscious decision, something has already appeared: a desire, an impulse, an inclination, a will. Choice comes afterward, as a response to that initial emergence. That is why a more careful definition of real free will does not begin with action, but with the will. If we understand real free will as the freedom of the will to determine itself, then we must observe two distinct things: the emergence of the will and the degree of freedom that this will find in order to become real. The will simply appears. It does not ask permission. And once it appears, it begins to face limits. Imagine, for example, that a person feels the will to be naked. The will arises, and that is not a choice. It exists as impulse, curiosity, comfort, or desire. At that point, there is neither freedom nor lack of freedom. There is only the emergence of the will. Now observe the context. If this will arises in the workplace, it immediately meets a series of barriers: social conventions, laws, professional rules, shame, fear of punishment, moral judgment. The will continues to exist, but its freedom to become real is minimal. It is strongly restrained, not because the person chose not to want it, but because the context makes its realization practically impossible. The same impulse, the same will, in another setting, meets a completely different reality. If that will arises when the person is alone at home, the situation changes radically. The barriers disappear. There is no punishment, no social embarrassment, no relevant transgression. The will becomes far freer to become real. And, in most cases, it becomes real without any conflict. What changed was not the will. What changed was the degree of freedom available to it. This simple example shows something fundamental. Freedom is not in the origin of the will, but in the conditions that allow or prevent its realization. And those conditions are not chosen by us. Laws, religion, morality, customs, education, culture, the physical and social environment. All of this acts as a limiter or a facilitator of the will's freedom. None of these factors is created by the individual at the moment of choosing. They are already given when the will arises. That is why we do not choose to want what we want. The impulse appears, and only then do we evaluate what to do with it within the limits available. Choice does not create desire. It negotiates with reality. Even when we resist a will, what happens is not absolute freedom, but conflict. One will collides with another. The desire to expose one's self against the fear of punishment, the impulse against shame, curiosity against the rule. The final action is the result of this internal clash, shaped by external factors. None of this happens in a void. There is no pure self deciding above circumstances. There is a situated human being crossed by norms, expectations, limits, and possibilities. This realization usually produces discomfort because it dismantles the fantasy that we are free for anything at any moment. But, once again, this discomfort is temporary. It exists to reveal something more refined: the understanding that freedom is not an internal button, but a relationship between will and context. When we understand this, choice stops looking like an inexplicable miracle and begins to be seen as what it really is: the possible expression of a real will within real conditions. Choosing, therefore, is not creating out of nothing. It is acting from what arises in us, negotiating with the limits and permissions of the world in which we are inserted. And it is precisely for this reason that choices teach, transform, and have consequences. They are not without prior foundation. They're coherent with what we are and with the context that surrounds us. In the next step, we will need to face an even deeper idea, the belief that even accepting all this, we still could have chosen differently under the same conditions. It is that belief that sustains a large part of exaggerated guilt and excessive pride, and it is what we will begin to dismantle next. For now, it is enough to keep this simple idea. The will arises. Its freedom depends on the world. Choice happens within those limits.